welcome back to the She Shoots podcast, Women Empowering Women in the Shooting Community, Season 2, Episode 16, The Mental Game. Today's episode will be covering the theme of mentors and coaches. My name is Regina Ruiz Ordóñez, and I'm from the Canadian University Shooting Federation. Joining me today, as always, are Deneen Tomlin and Casey Gavinchuk from Lady Guns, and Kelly Melanson from Maple Seed Project, Sci-Fi Radio, and CCFR Women's Program. I would like to start by taking a moment to thank our sponsors, Cabela's Canada Outdoor Fund, positively shaping the future of the outdoors. Every cent donated by rounding out at checkout goes toward helping Canadian organizations just like ours. Savage Arms, home to the Stevens single-shot rifles and shotguns, Beretta, family-owned and operated since 1526, Vortex, the best in optics, and Canada First Ammo. If you have any questions or comments throughout the show, make sure to leave them in the chat box below. Doing so will automatically enter you in the draw for today's giveaways. Today, we have a She Shoots t-shirt and a Canada First Ammo, if I'm correct, right? And so that's me. So, Deneen and Kelly, could you bio for our guest?
Absolutely. Let's take it away. And good evening, everybody. And really excited about this podcast. We had the opportunity to have a pre-podcast chat with Chloe, and I think that was a 2-hour chat. So I'm looking forward to tonight. So, Chloe, I get the honor of introducing you. I've got your bio in front of me, so I'm going to do a little bit of reading, and then when I'm done, after you say hello to everyone, we'll have Kelly start the questions. Does that sound okay? Awesome. All right. Chloé Gagnon, mental performance consultant from the Shooting Federation of Canada. Her love for sport and performance and her desire to support athletes in achieving their goals are what led Chloé Gagnon to obtain her bachelor's degree in Human Kinetics, as well as her master's degree in Human Kinetics with a concentration in consultation and intervention at the University of Ottawa. She is passionate about sport psychology and mental skills and mental training. Understanding and learning about the impact of mental performance on growth and sport performance are at the core of Chloe's work. As a professional member of the Canadian Sport Psychology Association, she has the amazing opportunity of working with athletes with different sports backgrounds and performance levels across Canada. Moreover, Chloe is the mental performance consultant for the Shooting Federation of Canada, as well as for the Canadian Blind Sports Association's National Goalball program. Welcome to She Shoots, Chloe. We're so excited to have you tonight.
Thank you, and thank you guys for having me.
Chloe, again, as Deneen says, thanks for coming on tonight. We're really super excited about having you here. I think that and again, like Deneen said, we had a chance to meet with you last week, and the quick chat that we had turned into about 2 hours, and it felt like, time was passing really fast because everything that we were talking about was so interesting, and what you do is so interesting as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, we have your bio, but why don't you give us a little bit of background about you specifically, and then also about the Shooting Federation of Canada and what you do there?
Of course. Yes. And thanks again for having me. I'm really excited to be here tonight. So my name's Chloe, and I'm from Montreal, if you guys can tell already by my accent. So Montreal, Quebec. I've always had just a passion for sport. I was a ringette and softball elite athlete, then became a coach. I did my bachelor's in Human Kinetics, so I was a strength and conditioning coach for a little bit, and then transitioned to sport psychology, where I did find my true passion, but I've always just been in sport all my life, always been super interested in high performance in sport. One thing as well as an athlete, I did struggle with performance anxiety, and I would have benefited from having a mental performance consultant working with me. And I think that's what really kind of brought me to this field, was that I, of course, was passionate about just wanting to help people, passionate about sport, but also really understood how important it was, and how important this field, which is mental performance in psychology, how important it is to actual performance, but also just well-being in sport. So that's kind of where it all kind of started for me. And then I continued my studies, did that master's, graduated in 2019, started my career during COVID. So that was a fun thing as well, a good challenge for me. So then I've been working now with the Shooting Federation of Canada for almost 3 years, as well as Canadian line sports and lots of different sports as mentioned earlier and different performance levels. But I'm just lucky that I get to work with inspiring and amazing athletes every day that motivate me to get better and want to learn for myself, but also just being in this amazing field, which is high performance, and our Shooting Federation of Canada athletes are awesome. So I've been working with them for 3 years now. And so I work mostly with our national team and dev team programs. So we mostly focus on the Olympic disciplines. So these are Olympic hopefuls, usually athletes that do have those big high performance goals. And my role is to support them in that through building and optimizing their mental skills so that they can achieve their goals while still prioritizing their well-being. And we do so by doing one-on-one sessions, so individual meetings, as well as group workshops, group meetings. And then also I travel with the team to camps and competitions.
Okay. So that's a lot of information that you just gave to us. Again, as I said, we spent 2 hours with you last week.
Yes.
Really started to explore these, and that's what we're going to be doing here this evening. So we did talk a little bit about it. So you just did a cursory overview of kind of what performance consultants do. But one of the questions that we had for you is, I think it's really important as well that people hear about this, is do you see yourself as a coach, or do you see somebody who's actually specifically there for the the performance piece of it?
Yeah. And I know that's something we kind of discussed last time and that I brought on, which is that I do feel like when we are to think of mental performance consulting, I do see it being closer to what a coach does, in the sense that, of course, the expertise is in mental performance and sports psychology, but just in the sense that there is a big collaborative approach with the athletes. We do on field work, and we work specifically, of course, on the mental skills. But I think sometimes when we think of psychology, which is yes part of the work, but we think of like going into an office, having a one-on-one meeting with a service provider, which of course can be really helpful. But when I think of mental performance and being part, it's more so being part of the team, right? So the same way you would have a strength and conditioning coach, the same way you have a technical coach that helps with tactical aspects as well. I kind of see it with just having a mental performance coach kind of being very similar. Of course, our expertise are very different, right? Whether it's technical, tactical, or strength and conditioning, especially because I do not have a shooting background. So I'm not there to say or provide any type of feedback or support for the shooting specific stuff. But I do see it more so coaching, kind of just being there to support the athletes in whatever they need.
Perfect. So we did want to, before we get any further into the discussion, we did want to tell people that are listening or be listening in the future that this is not specifically about shooting. You work a lot with the shooting, with the athletes who are part of the Shooting Federation of Canada, but this is about the mental piece. And it's also really, you don't have to be an elite athlete for you to use this stuff, and also to actually to reach out to somebody to help with, with the mental piece as well. I think that's important to state as well 100%. Before we get too far into this.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
The other thing we talked about, Kelly, and we asked Chloe before the end of the podcast tonight, we're hoping for some nuggets to share with our viewers and our listeners. So we've asked for some takeaways, maybe some podcasts, maybe some authors. And so for those of you who are viewing or are watching this and are wondering if that's what's coming, we are going to talk about some of those things as the podcast rolls out. So my first question, Chloe, now that we've figured out what you do and who you work with, is there a perceived stigma when working with a mental performance consultant? Like, when they reach out for support, do they reach out? Do you just get assigned to them? How does that work?
Yes. I will say that there's been tremendous, amazing work that's been done already with our field, trying to break that stigma of just reaching out for help and asking for help, and also having a mental performance consultant as being part of the team, but also for federations as well, to understand the importance of the field. So there's been amazing work that's been done already, but there is still 100% a stigma there. I think in high performance, we're getting there. I do see that most NSOs, so national sport organizations, most federations do have mental performance consultant working with them, or sports psychologists or psychologists. But I do see like a more local level, provincial level, I do see that there's for sure still a gap there. Big stigma of just what it is, how beneficial it could be, but also understanding that I think there's this idea that you only benefit from mental performance or psychology when you're struggling, which is, of course, a big part of it. Yes, if you are struggling, reach out for help. There are people that are there to help you. But especially when we're talking mental performance, it is not only for the athletes that aren't doing well, that are not performing, that are not enjoying their sport, that are not reaching their potential, right? It could be that you're doing awesome and you want to keep doing so. It could be that you're doing good and you want to find ways to be great, right? So it's not only when you're struggling. I think there's still for sure this idea, and that's what I think that's what prevents a lot of athletes from reaching out, is to just think like, no, I'm doing good, I'm not that stressed or anxious, or I'm doing okay, right? And then they don't think as to how it would benefit them. And for sure, I think that's something that's important to understand, is that even if you're doing awesome, we can find ways for that to continue on. We can find for ways to be consistent. We can understand why you're doing awesome, and find ways to keep doing so. So yes, of course, if you're struggling, yes, there's amazing help. I'm here to help as well. But even if you're doing great and you just want to find ways to do even better or to improve your performance, you have specific goals that you're struggling with, mental performance is for you as well, right? So there is the stigma, but I would say that again, we see it at national level, national sport organization that are introducing mental performance a lot more, psychology a lot more. So I think we're sending that idea and message that it is for everybody, for every athlete, even the ones that are at the top of their games, that they could benefit from it. I think one thing too is, I've seen it, and working with the SFC, one thing that has been very awesome is that I'm meeting monthly with the athletes. So whether it's an awesome month, whether you're not doing so well that month, whether it's pre-competition, post-competition, whatever it may be, we're meeting every month. And so I think that also kind of reinforces that idea that it's not only when you're not doing well or right before a competition, when a bit of panic sets in, that you reach out to Chloé, that we work together all year long. And of course, when there's depending on needs, we will and can meet more often. So it's not limited to once a month, but there's just that consistency, knowing that just like any skills, mental skills you need to work on, and it needs to be something you're consistent with. And that means all year long.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course.
So you're talking about working with them. Are you talking about working with them within a group, or are you talking about one-on-one, or both? You also talked about workshops as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that too?
Yeah. So with the SFC, it's actually both. So it's monthly group workshops and it's monthly individual meetings. So it actually kind of fits quite well. So it's both, right? So when we're talking individual meetings, it's really based on this specific athlete's needs, right? So where their gaps are, what their strengths are, what their goals are, what their competition season looks like. And especially with shooting, we've found with all 4 disciplines, but even within a discipline, some athletes won't go or attend the same competitions, right? So we have to really individualize our approach. But group workshops, it's usually, again, it's once a month. And I try to kind of tailor it to time of year, athletes' needs, athletes' interests, and also just kind of try to cover like basic mental skills training topics. So of course, in the last years, we've experienced COVID. So a few of our workshops were related to motivation, resilience, focusing on what we can control, optimizing our training in our basement, not having access to our teammates or support, or feeling sometimes lonely or alone by ourselves, right? So of course, a few of them were targeted, just COVID was a different situation. But then also, if I know that a big group of our athletes are attending one specific competition or major games, major events, then we will do workshops that are specifically targeted towards that. So it could be kind of focusing on the process. It could be mindfulness. It could be teamwork within an individual sport, knowing that we're all preparing to go and compete together, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of different things, getting out of a comfort zone, basic mental skills training, habit building. So a lot of these topics we've covered for sure, and plenty more to come as well.
Yeah. It sounds like great topics to cover, even for people who are not those elite athletes,
Oh,
just
100%.
even for people who are going out to maybe a provincial shooting competition, whether it's IPSC or whatever, mindfulness. And I
100%.
think we're going to get into that a little bit later too, some tips on that too. So, all right, thank you for that.
Of course.
You did mention that you travel with the athletes as well. Do
Yes.
you want to tell us a little bit about that? What types of things can affect our athletes that are traveling all over the world?
Yeah. So I do get to travel with our athletes. I will admit it's one of my favorite parts of it all. I do, as we know, especially with most of our sports in the Canadian system, and shooting is one. Our sport is, or the shooting sport isn't centralized, right? So we have athletes all across Canada. There are athletes I work with that are in Newfoundland, some other are in Vancouver. So most of our work is done remotely, right? So when we all get to be together and meet and be in person, of course, that's always one of the fun part. A great important aspect as well in terms of building rapport, which facilitate then our collaborative work together. So of course, traveling is a big part, and I think that's the one thing as well that maybe isn't as well as known in terms of mental performances. And that's where I kind of compare it to a coach, is that we are a part of the team, right? So it's traveling, it's going to camps, going to competitions, it's being there to support athletes, whether it is pre-competition, during the competition, sometimes between rounds, depending on what the discipline is, and then post-competition as well, right? So usually what it looks like, it would be probably meetings prior in preparation, and then once we're there, it's also sometimes meetings, but it's also me being and kind of having to run around a little bit when all four disciplines are competing at the same time, but me knowing what the athletes need. So for some example, for certain athletes, it would be that they want to have a quick chat after every round. And then for other athletes, it would be just kind of, they'll reach out at the end of the day type thing. And it's me knowing and us working together, having that plan, knowing how I can best support them while we're there. Of course, as we know, there are a lot of considerations when athletes are traveling, especially internationally. So we can think of jet lag, nutrition, food, sleep. You're not sleeping in your own bed, depending on where we're going. And even if we were thinking COVID, being away from your family for a long time, sometimes not knowing the people you're traveling with if you've traveled by yourself all year, right? So there are a lot of considerations, and my role is to help the athletes with that. So of course, there will be a lot of things that we'll have to do pre-competition. So in terms of your planning, so sometimes it's also helping athletes that are maybe newer to the field, just understanding what will a competition schedule look like, what should your sleep schedule look like. Sometimes it's also reminding athletes to bring comfort items that brings them comfort, right? So whether it's just your pillowcase or whatever it may be that kind of makes you feel a bit more at home in an hotel room halfway across the world. So sometimes it's just things like this, and it's also where that's where the collaborative work with the IST, so integrated support team, comes in. So that's where a nutritionist would come in as well and provide feedback and support to the athletes before the competition as well as during. That's where the physios, the physicians, the athletic therapists, that's where we kind of all work together, as well as the coaches, to kind of build the best schedule possible before leaving, so that the athletes can be at their best on competition day, but also feel good while doing so. But also me being on site, I can then also provide support while we're there.
Wow.
So leaning into that topic a little bit, Chloé, we talked about traveling and Canadian athletes. We all know that Canadian athletes aren't typically full-time sponsored athletes, and they have to work and they have families. So let's talk a little bit about how you help them juggle work, training, home life, emotional, mental kind of things that our athletes are juggling and traveling on top of that.
100%. Yeah. And that's, I would say, the reality for a lot of athletes in different sports as well, but for sure with shooting, right? They aren't full-time athletes. So that means they do have other commitments and other priorities as well, right? And there are other things that are really important in their lives. I would say in some ways that's an amazing thing. because we do see athletes being so involved in their sport 100% of the time that there's actually a disconnect with other hobbies or being with their families or other priorities. So I do think that in some ways it could be a great positive thing, but of course it comes with challenges, right? I do have to give it to the athletes. They are awesome. I've been working with them for 3 years now, and I would say that some of them do have amazing strategies already built in that they've learned with experience and time, and that they share with one another. But I will say that especially for athletes that aren't full-time, kind of the biggest thing that I'm noticing, especially the ones that do want to perform at a higher level, right? And they want to compete against athletes that get to do this full-time, is that they need to be extremely deliberate with what they're doing. So every training, every practice needs to be well planned. It needs to be extremely deliberate as to when you're going to train, what you're going to train, what you want to get out of it. And not that athletes that are full-time aren't doing that, but it's just, of course, we know the amount of time that you have for training when you're working full-time and you're a mom and you have other hobbies or the things they're trying to do is limited, right? So they need to go in and needs to be very deliberate. Of course, sometimes motivation can be a challenge just because there are other things that are coming up and other priorities. And that's where kind of the balance comes in, right? It is okay sometimes to, if there is something happening at work and it's a busy time of year, that you're not training as often because you want to prioritize self-care instead and really focus on work, right? And then the next week, it may be that you go back to your regular training schedule, right? So I think it's important for the athletes to find that balance, but also to just be kind to themselves and compassion, show self-compassion, and understand that it's normal that they are not able to do it all the time because they are really busy. So that's kind of what we work with. Like, again, I will say that most of them are just pros at just having a schedule and having things written on their fridge, and just they know when to train, when the kids are where, what they're doing and what works. So they're already awesome. But sometimes it's just building those strategies. But my main one, I would say, is making sure that while the athletes are doing so, that they're prioritizing self-care and recovery. Because we have seen a lot of athletes kind of want to do it all, which is awesome. But then you get to a point where you can't do anything anymore just because you got to that point where there's too much fatigue and you're too exhausted. So I think it's important the self-care is really important. Recovery is really important. And then we just make sure that we set great goals and plans. And we know that when you're going to training, you know what you want to work on, you know what you want to achieve, whether from a technical, physical, technical, did I say that already? Or tactical and mental standpoint, right? You know what you want to gain out of it. And so it's also sometimes relying on your high performance habits, which is also something that we really work on. So you will not want to train every day, especially after a hard day at work, after having to come home and feed the kids and yourself. And so it's also sometimes just relying on those great habits of just, whether it's scheduling, whether it's knowing what you want to achieve, where to go, what you need to do to increase your motivation. It's relying on those habits, because you will not want to do it every day. Although you're passionate and you have great goals, there will be days where you're tired and you don't want to do that. Of course, it's assessing, do I need a break? If the answer is yes, then take that break. But if the answer is I could still train, I just don't want to, then it's relying on our great habits and just kind of still getting out the door and getting your training and knowing that that's that at the end of the day, you'll be really happy with yourself that you went. But if you only wait until you'll want to, most of our athletes won't want to go to the gym. They won't want to train. Of course, we all have those days as well, right? And so it's having and building those great habits that we know we can rely on, no matter how busy or tired or fatigued, or no matter your motivation levels.
Outstanding. And I'm looking because we do prepare some notes before, and Kelly, you wrote some great stuff down here on performance versus process. So Kelly, your notes reflect a whole lot of
everything that
techniques and mindfulness and mental management. So maybe expand on that a little bit more, Kelly, and then Chloé can help us get into that.
Right. So these are some of the things that you work with the athletes on. And I also think these are some of the techniques that, to me, as an everyday, a level F shooter can use as well. There's certain things, those techniques such as self-talk and how that actually influences us, and also our motivation as well. Perception, maybe, how we see ourselves. Do you want to expand a little bit on that and how it actually, it's specific to the mindfulness piece that you were talking about a little bit earlier?
Yes, 100%. And kind of to tie to as well, kind of that difference between process and outcome, right? And where my focus is, and so kind of just to kind of bigger picture, of course, outcomes are important, performance is important, but it's not the whole picture, right? So when I am asked which one's the most important, I would tend to then say process, right? So of course, it's not to say that the outcomes aren't there, the performance is not important. It's okay for you to have performance goals. It's okay for you to want to win the next competition. It's okay for an athlete to want to improve and to see those improvements of progress, hopefully with the medal around their necks and being on a podium and getting to get to that next stage and next level, making a team or whatever it may be, right? So having those outcome goals are great. They're great motivators. They're great reminders as to why we're doing these things. And especially in those days where maybe we're struggling with motivation, going back to those outcome goals can be really important. But at the end of the day, it's not the best way to get to those goals is by not thinking about them. And what I mean by that is that if I focus on the outcome, I'm actually making it harder for myself to actually reach it. Whereas if I go back to the process, and as you mentioned, the techniques, is if I am present, if I am focusing on right now, what is it that I need to do to get this next shot, to hit this next target, to get a 10, if I am being present, if I'm being mindful, I'm actually making it a lot easier for myself to then get the medal, right? But if the only thing that I'm thinking about is the medal, then that just leads to increased anxiety, a lot of pressure, low self-confidence, a lot of self-doubt if I'm making a mistake. Whereas if I'm just focused in the present moment, if I'm focused on right now, what is it that I need to do? I'm actually making it easier for me to reach those goals. So those goals are important, they're there, but they shouldn't be the main thing. We shouldn't have to, or we shouldn't think about those goals all the time, especially not when we're shooting, right? So that's where kind of my works comes in, which is just the how. How can we get great performance consistently while you feeling at your best? That's kind of the most important, right? And that's where all these techniques and strategies come in, right? So that mindfulness piece that you can work on, meditation, just being present, being in the here and now. There's no anxiety in the here and now. There's no self-doubt. There's just you in the present moment. And then in order to do so, there are plenty of techniques that we can use in order to feel at our best, perform at our best, but things like, as you've mentioned, self-talk, refocusing strategies, a distraction plan, arousal controls, stress management, right? All these different things that we can do so that we are at our best and that we can stay in the present moment and that we can focus on our process. We can focus on our how, while still knowing that, of course, there's a what, there's an end, there's an outcome, but that the outcome is just such a small piece of the picture of the puzzle. It's so small that if we only rely on that, there will be very little enjoyment in your sport, but also very little success in achieving those actual goals, right? So it's looking at the how, the process, being present, enjoying yourself while doing so, and that'll get you to improve, grow, get better, and get that medal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I have that's okay. I got a question because so those of us that go out and shoot competitions at whatever level, sometimes we have a stage that doesn't go so well, or perhaps we're shooting with other people in our squad and we tend to get caught up in the speed or the style of their game, let's say. What do you suggest we do to get ourselves refocused or get back into our game? Chloe, what should we do?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Of course, there could be a lot of different ways that we can take it. That's the fun part, of course, about the individualized and one-on-one work, is that maybe one thing that could work for you could be different than somebody else. But I would say that in general, it's all about, again, coming back to the present, being mindful, but also focusing on what you can control and what you can do, right? And so I cannot change what the others are doing at the speed that they're going, with the referees are doing. I cannot change and go back and change the previous round or the previous match. I can't go back and change that, although I'm sure at some point we all wish we could. And if you can, I always say this to athletes, but if you can, just let me know, because that'd be awesome. But we can't, right? If that's done, over with, it's really focusing on what we control. And the one thing we control is the here and now. It's how we see things, how we perceive it, how we react to them, and how we prepare for the next thing, right? And so I think the one thing I would say is focusing on what you can control. And so whenever it is that you're done with a round, or whenever you're in a round and you're getting frustrated because people around you are throwing their shells, or they're being loud, or they're going super fast, to just come back to yourself
You.
and what you
Yeah.
know how to do and what you can do and what you can control, because you can get super frustrated by it all. It won't change the fact that that athlete is throwing their shells or that they're going super fast because they're doing their own thing, right? So it's going back to you, what you know you can do, what you can control. And that's a great thing with shooting, is that although of course we can kind of get swept into all this and want to maybe increase our pace or maybe change what we know how to do, we don't have to though, right? So it's not what others do not dictate what you're going to do, right? So I think it's going back to what you can control. And of course, that's when sometimes self-talking can come in, of just reminding yourself to focus on what you can control, what you can do, what you're able to achieve. But I would say kind of being present and focusing on what we can control would be a big one for sure, that would benefit everybody, regardless of your performance level, regardless of what the situation actually was. We often find ourselves being stuck in the past or being frustrated by others or what's happening. And of course, I'm not saying that it's not. I think the first thing would probably be to recognize it and acknowledge it, that I am getting frustrated or I am disappointed. That's how I'm feeling. That's okay. Accept it. And then come back to, what is it though that I can do about it right now, right? What can I do? What can I control? How can I stay present? And really focusing on that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like I need, in my toolbox, I need my tactical game plan, which is my practice and my techniques and how I approach my shots, my targets, whatever.
100%.
But I also need that mental game plan, that pre-shooting routine, that interruption of process if things aren't going the way I need to, etc. So those are really
100%.
great tips. Thank you.
Yeah. And they go together as well. I think that's the thing. Often we kind of see it as they're all different aspects, but when it comes to an actual competition or a match or even a round, they're all together, right? Your pre-competition routine or your pre-round routine or your refocusing routine needs to be aligned with your shot plan and with your tactical or technical approach, right? It all needs to kind of go together. And that's when you will not only be at your best from a technical standpoint, but also feel at your best, which is super important too. It's great to hit targets. It's great to hit a 10, but it's even better when we feel good doing it.
Right. So one of the things you did talk about, I think that's a very good analogy or a quote that you had, was a lot of athletes or a lot of people focus on the goal or the end goal as opposed to the journey that they took to get there. And we also talked about it from that journey. We have to have joy in the stuff that we do. And
100%.
if we don't enjoy it, then that's also going to affect our performance, is it not?
100%. Oh, 100%. Of course. Yes. So I know sometimes we may have this, when we say this of just enjoy the journey and have fun, it almost seems like, okay, like seeing everything so positively and pink and everything's good and easy. And that's not what we're saying, but it's also just knowing that by thinking this way, by having those preferred perspective of just growth or positiveness or gratefulness, we're actually going to perform better. So it's not only to just say this so that we feel better, which is awesome, of course, but it also is based on research going to help you perform better as well. And so, of course, if you are focusing on the outcome, that only leads to increased pressure, sometimes also frustration from lack of results, right? So if your goal is to, in 2 years, 3 years, being able to do this, of course, you're not going to see a big difference tomorrow, and probably not the day after that, and maybe not in a week either, right? But then if you're only thinking about where you want to be in a month or 3 months or 2 years, you may get frustrated with that. Whereas if I'm enjoying what I'm doing every day, I kind of don't mind not seeing results every day, right? It also can affect motivation, of course. If I'm only thinking about results, then what happens if I don't? Like if I don't win, if I don't get the medal, if I don't see improvement, am I then done with my sport? Is that really how we want to approach it, right? And so it's just, and sometimes also decreased confidence. If you're always just thinking of the outcome and winning or getting better or being the best, there will be times where you will not win. There will be times where you will not be the best. Does that then mean that you're no good at shooting, that you should quit, and that you will never reach your goals? No, of course not. But then if we're only thinking of outcomes, if we're only saying or seeing our sport as just either success or failure, then we will not be able to perform at our best. We will also not be, of course, enjoying the journey, but also in a lot of cases, we see then athletes completely quit. They stop participating in their sport. And of course, we're talking high performance and medals, and that's great. But at the end of the day, the goal is to be able to compete and even sometimes just practice your sport for as long as possible, right? And so we want to find ways to do so. And so you need to find ways to enjoy what you're doing. And it does not go without saying that there will be days though where you do not maybe want to train, or there will be days where you're maybe not the biggest fan of your sport or not as passionate, and that's okay. But we just mean just overall, there should be a lot more days where you're really enjoying what you're doing than not. And that will ultimately contribute to performance. Whereas if you're only thinking, and if you're looking at the journey, the process, and you're enjoying it, then regardless of the outcome, you can always look back at an amazing ride that you had trying to reach that goal and knowing that you can learn from it. Whereas if you only look at kind of that end picture, then not only are you not enjoying the ride there, but also what if you don't get it, right? You're not going to be able to, you're going to look at that experience as just a whole thing that was just negative, when of course it wasn't, right? And so finding the positives and the joys every day and focusing on the process will actually help you get to your end goal, but also making it a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah. You also talked about how, well, look at it from the perspective of maybe, there is somebody who has ranked very low in the world, but they're going to the Olympics and they're enjoying the fact that they're in
100%.
the Olympic, atmosphere. And it could be the same thing with us as well. Let's say there's a match that we've never gone to before, and
100%.
in a different province or maybe in a different country, and we're going there. Enjoy the process. And enjoy the journey of getting there.
Yes, 100%. And that's one thing too, that even I was lucky enough to go with the goalball national team to the Tokyo Paralympics. And that was one thing too, where we were getting kind of swept away with just everything of just, we want to win. We've just lost a game. So we're frustrated. We're at this level. We're aiming for podium, where I just kind of sat the group down and I just take 5 minutes, and I was just like, guys, we're in Tokyo. Like, we're at the Paralympics. How fun is that? How cool is that, right? Of course we have performance goals. Of course these are athletes that are super competitive and they have great hopes for their team and themselves and their country, right? They want to achieve amazing things, but also it's okay to just sometimes take 5 minutes and just enjoy the fact that you're there, that you are at this amazing competition, even if it's a local competition, if it's your first one, if it's the first time that you're in a squad with one of your best friends, right? If it is that you get to now go to a different province for the first time, or even if it's just training and you've been to this range 1,000 times, but sometimes just saying like, how great do I feel when I'm here? Like, I feel at home. I know the people. I'm enjoying this. Like, gratitude can get us a long way. And for sure, that's a big part of enjoying the process as well. And I think one thing that hopefully COVID taught us is that it's important to appreciate what we have, because there was a point where competitions weren't a thing, having access to ranges wasn't a thing, even going to the grocery store wasn't really a thing anymore, right? And I think, of course, I hope that it did for everybody, just a great reminder of just sometimes taking those 5 minutes to appreciate and be grateful and be happy to be somewhere can really, it shifts your whole mood, shifts your perception, and it helps you, of course, then perform better, but it helps you enjoy what you're doing in that moment. Just being grateful to be there.
So we're talking about the mind and mindfulness. My question next is, we train for the technical aspects of our sport, but it sounds like you're suggesting we need to do some mental training as well.
100%.
Let's talk about that. And is one more important than the other, or should we have mental training nights instead of dry fire nights, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, I would say kind of there are a few aspects to that question that are super important, but I would say the first one, yes, you need mental training. I would say we would all benefit even in our daily lives from mental training, but especially if you do want to get better at your sport, if you want to improve, or it could be at work as well, like you want to increase your performance, or even it could be your communication in your relationship, whatever it may be. Like, we can all benefit from mental training. I would say that, of course, I'm not saying that we should stop all the technical training to do mental training, because at the end of the day, you need to know how to shoot to be able to optimize it through your mental skills. But I would say it's both, right? They are very different in the sense that not because you are training, let's say you're at the range 30 hours a week, which would be awesome and probably a lot of athletes' dreams, but let's say you have the range 30 hours a week. I'm not saying that you should do 30 hours of mental skills training, right? It does not have to be an hour for an hour, 30 hours for 30 hours. It's just making sure that it is a part of your routine. So sometimes it could be an additional 5, 10, 15 minutes a day where maybe you're doing meditation, maybe you're journaling, maybe you're doing or using an app. There are a lot of great tools, and one that I use is called a neurotracker. So it's basically helps with your peripheral vision and cues and memory, right? So it could be that you're doing and using this app to train your mental skills. It could be that you're having a meeting with a mental performance consultant. Maybe you're reading a book. Maybe you're reflecting or debriefing your training session. Maybe you're the way you're doing your mental training is actually while you're doing your tactical or technical training as well. So maybe you're training under harder conditions. Maybe you're adding some pressure. Maybe you're putting some music that's quite distracting while you're training and shooting. Maybe you set alarms on your phone to distract yourself on purpose, and that you have to turn off your phone and go back to train, right? So I would say that for any athlete, it's not one or the other, it's both. But usually the case is at this point, from what I've seen with a lot of athletes and a lot of people, is that we really tend to focus on the physical aspects of performance and technical. Like we go to the gym, we go to the range. What I'm saying is that we need to include the mental training. So it needs to be there, needs to be a big part of your training. That's usually where the biggest gaps for especially elite athletes and high performance are, right? Because there you get to a point where everybody knows how to shoot. Everybody in training shoots 25s. Everybody in training shoots 10s. But the biggest difference maker will be at a competition. How are you able to cope with the pressure? How are you able to perform on demand? How are you able to learn from mistakes and not get discouraged by them, right? So that's where the biggest difference will be. So it's not one or the other, it's all three. And it's, again, when we're talking mental training, it's just even finding 5 minutes. It's 5 more minutes than what you were doing before. And that's kind of how I like seeing it. I do have athletes that I work with that meditate for an hour every day, but that's not where you start, right? That's somebody that has been working on these skills for years on end, right? So it could be 3 minutes of you being more mindful during the day, or 3 minutes, again, as I said, journaling and whatever it may be. And I'm throwing a lot of things your way, but those are 3 more minutes that you weren't doing before, that you know are contributing to your performance, but also your well-being. Like doing 3 minutes of meditation in the morning isn't only just helpful for when you'll go shooting at the end of the day. It's actually helpful while you're at work. It's helpful if you're in school, if you're preparing for an exam, if you're going before a meeting, just making sure that you're focused and ready to go, right? So having those mental trainings throughout the week will help your performance and your sport performance, but also just your well-being throughout that said week.
One of the really great tips that you just gave was journaling. And with journaling, try journaling every day, and then also look at incorporating things in there, what I did well, whether it's through our training, so that you can repeat it, and then you can take 100%. That and you can reflect on it throughout the year and how you've improved and how that's actually helped and supported you as well. Such a great 100%. Tip.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a great one for sure. And that's one that I suggest to athletes often as well, is kind of having that journal and having that section that's focused on the positives, to what went well. And also that's one thing that sometimes certain athletes, what they'll do, and what I recommend, is before competition, or sometimes if between rounds, if the first one didn't go so well, or if it's competition on 2 days didn't go so well, go back and read all the great things you did in training that got you to this point, right? So sometimes it's also knowing, not only is it great to do it that day and focus on the positives and the things that are going well, but it is a tool that you can refer and go back to whenever you need. So if you feel a bit down, if you feel like you lack a bit of confidence, or there's self-doubt, or even if you feel awesome and you're preparing for the next day, the competition and the next round, reading it, of course, is going to contribute to a great performance that's to come as well. So that's a big one for sure.
Yep. We also have to understand that we're going to have bad days. And if we didn't have those bad days, we couldn't appreciate our really good days.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
for
right.
Sure. Yeah.
So journaling is one of the areas you recommend. So when you're journaling, you can see all those positive things, but you can also write down all the things that didn't go so well. So how can somebody outside of journaling that we've already talked about identify their strengths and weaknesses so that they can start making a plan to work on?
Yeah. For sure. And even just going back to journaling, and that's why we had the pre-meeting for this was 2 hours long. But one thing that I would say if people are journaling is, I would say, make sure that there are more things that you wrote down that went well than things that you had to work on. So make sure that there's always either let's say you write 5 things you need to work on, then I want for you to write 6 things that went well that day. So always make sure that there is really the positive, and you focusing on the positive. And especially sometimes it's also limiting the things that you write. So I will say with a few athletes is you get to write 3 things that you want to work on next time, because even if you are to write 100, you cannot work on 100 at once. There's no point in writing down everything that's going wrong, because you will not get to work on all these things. So focus on 3 or 2, some of them even limited to 1. And then for that 1, write at least 2, or sometimes we even challenge ourselves to like at least 5. So 1 thing that you want to work on next time, or gap, or something you've identified, and then 5 things that went well. So then we're not saying that everything's always great, you're the best, nothing to work on. There are things to work on, but if we want to do it, if we want to achieve that goal, then we need to do it in a way that will allow us to do so. And therefore it's just focusing on 1, 2, max 3 things that we can work on. So that's just something there to keep in mind for those of you that want to start journaling. But I would say one strategy that I often use with athletes, when we're talking of identifying gaps and strengths and things we want to work on. Of course, some athletes they have that self-awareness already. They can identify it very clearly. But I would say one thing that I do with athletes is often it is something that you can just sit down and write down, but think of like your 2 best performances and think of your 2 worst ones. And often as athletes, those come quite easy. Sometimes even the worst ones a lot easier than the great ones. But then what you want to do is then you want to write down your fast. And what I mean by fast, it's feelings, actions, sensations, and thoughts. And you want to do that for before the competition. So you're fast for before, you're fast for during, and then you're fast for after. So you want to do that for 1 competition, your best one. You want to do it again for another great one. And then you want to do that for worst one, and then another one that didn't go so well. And then you look at the differences, right? Like on my best day, before the competition, I was feeling calm, or I was feeling prepared, or I was feeling confident, or I was thinking about how great it was for me to be here, how excited I was to be here. During the round or during the match, I was feeling excited, I was feeling ready, I was actions, what you did during the round, so that could be your plan. And then my thoughts, I was just thinking of the next shot, for example. And you do that for your 2 best performances, 2 worst, and of course I don't like using the word worst, but those performances that didn't go so well. And then you look at the difference, and you will see the difference very clearly, and that can help you identify your gaps. It's also asking yourself, do I find myself being more so on the it's going awesome and great side, and I struggle finding the performances that don't go so well, or the opposite? And so just seeing if there are any trends or patterns, because sometimes there may be your 2 best competitions may be completely different. And it's also just understanding and seeing why or what happened. But you will find it often some things do, like you will see a clear difference of just, for example, somebody that performed really well while being calm. When we look at their worst ones, they were super anxious, for example, or they were stressed or rushed. And so you could see the difference. And then it helps you identify, okay, I'm somebody that performs better when I'm feeling calm, where there could be people that perform better when they're feeling excited. There could be people that feel better when they're by themselves before a round. And there are people that really want to be social. And so you can see the patterns, and then you can ask yourself, okay, do I have a strategy that gets me there every time? So if I know that me being calm before a round or during or whichever is me at my best, do I know how to get there every time? And if the answer is yes, great. We have maybe one of your strengths right there. And if the answer is like, no, you know what? Actually, I do perform better when I'm calm, but I don't know why that day I felt so calm. Then that may be a gap in terms of us figuring out what are those strategies or techniques that we can use and build in your plan and pre-competition plan so that you can do it every time. So I would say that's kind of usually a strategy that I recommend people doing. And of course, it's through discussions and collaborative work that we can also kind of pinpoint exactly what things are. But I think especially something that you can do at home is just, again, doing our fast. So feelings, actions, sensations, and thoughts for pre-competition, during the competition, after, and then you take your best performances, your worst ones, and you compare and you see what helped me, what didn't. Are these things I can do? Is it just a one-time thing? Because we all have those days where either things just go super well and it's hard for us to understand why, and we have those days where everything seems to go wrong, even though we feel like we did everything right. But then just looking, are there patterns? Are there things? Do I have techniques that get me there every time? And if the answer is no, we can work on it. If the answer is yes, you just found one of your strengths and you can keep building on that.
Oh, wonderful. Now, have you been talking about those elite athletes and also people who are everyday shooters like Denise and myself? we also have some people who are going to be listening that are new shooters, or people who are just they're on the fence, let's say, about getting into the sport. What are some of the suggestions you have for those people with that mental piece about whether they should actually get into the sport, or thinking, you know what, this, going to a competition is only about people who are really, excellent shooters, and I don't belong here, that type of thing. So, what are your thoughts on that? How can strategies or techniques do you have for those people that are brand new to the sport and are thinking about getting into it?
100%. Well, for one, I would say that when we're talking, and I know we've touched on that a little bit, but when we're talking mental training, it's not only for high performance athletes or experts or people that have been competing for years, right? It's actually even more beneficial for people that are beginners in a sport, or maybe that are younger, that are setting those great habits early on, right? So I would say, of course, anybody can benefit from the mental skills and building on those skills. I would say it's, again, whether you are newer to the competition, whether you have never been before, you're just starting with the sport, it's always kind of going back to what it is that you can do, what makes you happy, what you enjoy. And so whether you're at the level of the other athletes there or not, you're doing it for you at the end of the day. So it's going to the competition, focusing on you, what you can do, what you can control. And of course, it's also just knowing what's expected. And of course, we expect for an athlete that's competing for the first time to feel a bit more anxiety, right? To feel a bit more of that pressure, to maybe have those thoughts of just wanting to compare themselves to others, or maybe have those thoughts or feeling like I don't belong here. And it's just knowing that's okay. That's normal. That's expected. I think we've all been in situations where we've been somewhere for the first time and that's how we feel. But then because we know that this is something that can happen, we can then prepare for it. If I know I've experienced this before, if I know it's expected, it's not to say that I shouldn't feel like this or that I won't, but I can prepare for this. I can go and again, it's just maybe the way my perception, how I see things. Maybe it's whenever I catch myself comparing myself to others, that I can remind myself that there was a point where they were in my shoes. They were the beginners at some point. Maybe it's just, I can see it again from a gratitude standpoint of just, I'm just excited to be at my first competition. I'm just happy to be here, right? So it's all about, again, going back to what is it that you can do, but also knowing that those feelings and thoughts are normal. They're expected. It's actually quite there are only quite a few people that can go into a new situation for the first time feeling super confident, not worrying about others, knowing they'll do their best, not being worried, not having doubts, right? It's actually, and then with time it can get easier, but I mean, a lot of people, we know that feeling of getting out of our comfort zone, and often it's that feeling that prevents us from doing so. But we know that if we persevere, and if we know that this is expected, that this is okay for me to be a bit nervous, for me to compare myself to others, for me to have these thoughts, the self-doubt is normal, then we can just prepare for it. I can find ways to learn in this situation, knowing maybe I'm the only new one here, the beginner here, but that means I'm surrounded by people that have shot at multiple competitions. How great is that? Because if I was surrounded by other beginners, I wouldn't learn as much. Now I get to see what the others are doing, what their routines are, what the culture is like, the environment is like. And so sometimes, again, it's just a matter of how I am seeing it and perspective, while still acknowledging and recognizing that it is okay and normal to have these feelings and these thoughts, but we can prepare for it, and we can just shift our perspective so that it is a helpful one, and also helps us get out of a comfort zone and wanting to do it again. Because it's great going to your first competition, but we want for you to go to a second one and the third one, for you to continue competing if that is something you want, right? So kind of changing our perspective can get us a long way with that as well.
Getting outside our comfort zone, or even trying a different aspect of the sport, a different discipline.
100%.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Great suggestions. And so I'd like to segue from that comment, Kelly, because we are She Shoots. We are a woman's podcast.
Yes.
There are a couple things that I found interesting, being a lady that has got into a sport that is considered a male-dominated sport. So often I may not shoot against in the same division or category, but I do get squatted with guys in some of my sports. I'm not necessarily that confident, perhaps, when there's a super awesome guy there. And for new shooters, to not only overcome the sport for the first time, but also be squatted with a bunch of guys when you're a woman. Let's talk about a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk about hormones maybe after.
We're going to go there.
We're going there. All right. So let's first talk about men and women shooting in the same squad, same sport, same discipline. And from a woman's perspective, how do we overcome those nerves?
100%. I would say, of course, that could be a challenge. Of course, that is something that we all need to maybe prepare for, and we need to have strategies for it, but also we need to consider that, especially with this sport, I think that's an amazing thing, that gender doesn't have a big impact on performance, right? Or at all in some capacity. So I think maybe that's the first thing to remember as a woman, as a girl starting in shooting, is that yes, it may be intimidating being next to these guys that are awesome and great performers, and maybe you're the only girl at the competition, maybe you're the only woman on your squad, but just thinking how awesome is that, because I'm sure that a lot of women in a lot of sports would appreciate and want to have those opportunities to get to compete sometimes with men and show that we are just as good and just as strong and just as fast and just as smart, right? So I think it's sometimes just, again, that small just step back of thinking that that's kind of awesome, actually being able to compete everybody together. I think also, of course, sometimes when we're talking sport and competition, I think seeing it from a competitiveness standpoint can also be helpful. Of just like, okay, I'll show you what I can do. I'll show you how women can shoot, how girls can shoot. I'll show you what I can do. I think just this shift in perspective, although you may lack the confidence, just having that shift of just, you know what, no, I'll show them how great women are in this sport. Again, just changing our perspective and just having this attitude of just, you know what, bring it. I'm the only one woman here, and that's awesome. And I'll show these men what I can do. So I think, again, it's just focusing on what you can do and control. At the end of the day, you can't choose who you're squatted with, right? You cannot choose and change that you're the only woman there. Of course, we can do a lot of great work and wanting for women to shoot a lot more. But I mean, in general, when you get to competition, that's just what it is, right? But you could just change how you see it, how you perceive it, go back to focusing on you and what you do and what you know how to do, but also sometimes just changing, again, from gratitude or just thinking also how awesome it is that your sport doesn't, the impact of gender isn't as significant as in other sports. And also just bring out that competitiveness. Like if you are competing and you're at a match, it probably means that you enjoy that aspect of it all as well. And just kind of say, bring it and show and have that attitude in your head held high and just thinking that you can do it. And also sometimes it's maybe talking to other women that have been in your position before as well. So just kind of reaching out, asking how they felt and what they did and their own strategies. And sometimes, you know, you can learn a lot from the women in this field. And from what I can tell and see so far, this is a great community and people are willing to support each other and help each other. So I would say that's one of the things as well. And sometimes just maybe there is maybe a female athlete that you are that's kind of one of your idols or that you think is an amazing athlete, and you can go and talk to that person. Maybe you'll find that she was also in your shoes a few years back starting in their sport, right? So I think reaching out to people, but going back to you focusing on you and what you can do and control, and rather than you looking at all the other men, what they're doing and competing, let them look at you and how awesome you're doing.
Yep.
I love the fact that you pointed out, and one of our previous guests as well pointed out, that it doesn't matter in the shooting sports your age, and it doesn't matter the discipline, because 100%. It's an even playing field, and that is fantastic. So thank you.
100%. Yeah, and sometimes just being grateful for that and happy for that is something, it can get us a long way, right? So of course, again, there's a competitiveness and comparison, or there is sometimes just this divide between gender, just in general, and it has been in sport like that for a long time. But just remembering that maybe is one of the most awesome thing about yours, is that it doesn't matter, that you just go out there and you can shoot and enjoy it and have fun and do your best.
Yep. That's exactly it. Do your best. Great. So we are going to go there. So women. We are women, and as we progress through life, we have these changes with us and our hormones. It does studies show it does affect our mental game, our mental preparedness. I know as I'm progressing and aging along, I'm starting to get that foggy brain. which is obvious sometimes when I'm doing the podcast as well. Can you talk about women and how it actually does impact female athletes and people and women who are competing? Our hormones do that.
Of course. Yeah. And I think, again, that goes back to how awesome this sport is, whether, again, we're talking gender, but also age isn't a factor that you can compete for a long time. I would say that with a lot of sports, talking about hormonal changes such as like menopause and all these things later on are conversations in a lot of sport, because athletes don't compete for that long. If you are to even think of, for example, gymnastics, where it's more so of puberty, more so than menopause, that we have to talk to athletes about, right? But of course, and I'm not an expert here in this kind of specific like hormonal aspect of it all, but of course, hormones do have an impact on our cognitive functions. That's well known, well researched. We know that menopause and just the changes in fluctuation in hormones, whether it is through menopause, which is kind of one of the more significant changes, but also in general, as we age, can be associated with a certain cognitive decline. So when we're talking kind of brain fog, it's more so the processing speed, or impact on sleep as well is a big one, which of course then affects our memory, our cognitive functions. So of course, this is something that we just need to consider. I would say that from a mental performance standpoint, again, and I know I'm maybe getting annoying with this, but it's going back to the things that we can do and control. And at the end of the day, that's just part of being a woman. That's just it. There are great ways that you can talk to your physician about. There are things that can, whether it's medications or any of that can help. But I mean, just from a sense, that's just what being a woman is that there will be fluctuations in hormones, whether we're talking puberty, whether we're talking menopause, whether we're talking being pregnant, like there will be changes. Yeah. We just need to accept that. I will say that's the first thing probably, is kind of being accepting and being kind to yourself, that it is okay, that it's just part of being a woman, which is awesome. But I would say from a mental performance standpoint, it's acknowledging that it is a thing, but also knowing that there are things we can do though, right? So it's not, we accept it, but also there are things we can do. So when we're talking sleep, it's also making sure that you have a great sleep routine, right? So what is it that you do every night that helps you make sure that you have great quality sleep, right? Are you drinking 5 coffees right before you go to bed? Or do you have a routine where not only you're not on your phone, but you're maybe reading, maybe you're taking a bath, maybe there are things you do every night that helps you sleep high quality sleep. We know sometimes with menopause, it could be something like temperature thing as well, right? So are you making sure that you are in an environment that you're comfortable in? So from a sleep perspective, there are things you can do. Also, stress is a big one, right? When we have those hormonal changes. So do you have stress management strategies, right? Do you have relaxation techniques? Do you journal? Do you have great social support? Are there people around you that you can talk about, right? And we've talked meditation, that's a big one. But also even when we're talking processing speed, or if we're talking actual memory, that's where the mental skills training comes in, right? And we hear that often of like people can do crossword puzzles and that helps, and that, it actually does, right? It is shown to help. So when we're talking mental skills training, whether you're doing a focusing exercise where it's just you're practicing, of course, we have 4 different types of focus, right? Like the narrow focus, broad, whatever it may be. Maybe it's just you observing an object for 2 minutes and not being distracted. And that's you training your brain to stay focused, for example. Maybe in terms of memory, you're doing some memory games, or you're doing certain strategies that you know contribute to increase it in memory. So it's also just knowing that again, it's okay, it's normal, it's expected, but also that there are things we can do so that we can kind of take it back into our own hands. There are strategies we can do to maximize sleep, memory, stress management, mindfulness, and actual mental skills training. One thing that's great though is, although with all that said and being considered, when we're talking younger athletes, so even when we're talking like puberty and all that, with which there could be a lot, and there is a lot of hormonal changes, it has still been shown in research that there is no major differences in terms of mental skills and in mental performance for both genders, regardless of hormonal changes. So that means that young girls and young boys are able to perform the same at certain skills. Of course, there are individual differences, but that's the thing that's important, is that we need to consider that it's the same, and that therefore the interventions can still be the same as well, both for boys and girls, regardless of hormonal changes. So that's something to consider as well. So yes, there are things we just need accept that's part of being women, but also does not mean that your mental performance is not good or worse than boys or men. There are a lot of great things we can do, and it's not that all your functions will go away either. It's just a slight decline, but there are things we can do to prevent it. And also, while you are experiencing those hormonal changes, there are things you can do so that you regain your cognitive functions.
Wow. So one last thing then, while we're on the topic, and you brought it to the younger athletes, what are some words of wisdom that you have for women, young ladies, young athletes getting into shooting sports or into other sports, and the benefits of getting into sports that you would like to pass on? So words of wisdom and those lasting benefits that you've realized, perhaps.
100%. Yes. Oh, for sure. And I think that's what got me in this career to begin with, was how me appreciating and being able to recognize everything that sport brought me, right? And that's the thing as well. And just from kind of a personal note as well, I've played in elite sports all my life. And if I am to think of like the provincial team when I played softball or ringette, I am maybe one of few girls that are still, and women at this point, that are still playing and doing their sport, right, that they loved. So I think, to me, the one thing that's the most important is to find something that you enjoy, whether it's shooting or any other sport, something that brings you joy, that you enjoy the process, but also, again, that you are doing it for you and being present, and to just, again, doing it for you, focusing on what you can do, what you can control, but also just going in knowing that you're doing because you enjoy it. I would also say that, especially for younger athletes, to know that it's okay to like multiple sports and you can do a lot of them. I think that's one thing too we see in a lot of sports. It's almost this feeling of you pick one and you stick with it for your whole life. No, you can do 10 different activities if you want, and if you have the time to do so, but you can try sports. And I think it's just finding, for everybody to be able to acknowledge and recognize what are the benefits of them participating in their sport, right? If you are doing it because you're competitive, but then it just leads to increased anxiety, lower self-confidence, a lot of pressure. If you feel like you don't want to disappoint people, you're doing it for other people, then it's just understanding that it's not that sport isn't for you. It may just be this specific context that is not for you, right? So going back to doing it for you, what you enjoy, what you love. Of course, it's okay and great to have those great goals, especially when you're newer to a sport. Of course, you want to improve. Of course, you want to maybe get to compete. Maybe you want to be on a certain team. Maybe it's a provincial team. Maybe you want to one day be at the Olympics. And that's awesome. But it's also finding ways to enjoy it daily and knowing that you enjoy your sport, and to not limit yourself to one is one thing that I would for sure recommend. And then also asking for help when needed. So whether we're talking coaches, but it could be other athletes in the same sport. It could be athletes from other sports. It could be a mental performance consultant. It could be your physio. It could be a teacher at school, wherever it may be. If you're struggling, if you need help, and we're not only talking mental health here, but also just you're new, you don't know where to go, don't know what to do, what to start. Maybe you're not enjoying it as much as you thought. Maybe you are enjoying way more than you thought, whatever it may be, to just reach out and ask for help and support. And there are great people around you that will be able to provide that help for you.
Yeah, really amazing. So where can people contact you if they are interested? Maybe, Deneen did mention that maybe you'll have some podcasts or some recommendations for books, or if you have a couple, you can drop them now if you'd like, or if people are interested, where can they contact you?
Of course. So maybe what I could do is maybe I could send it to you guys and maybe add it to like the bio or something, or send it to the athlete, just so that I don't kind of list now 10 books and 2 podcasts, or if that is okay with you. If not, I could do that as well. But if anybody wants any tips, advice, insight, if they just want someone to talk to, you can reach me at my email address. So Gagnon, GAGNON.MPC for mental performance consultant at gmail.com. And if not, I do have a LinkedIn for my own name, as well as an Instagram. But I would say usually email is the easiest way to reach me. And so that was one thing that I did mention last time when we first met, and something that I do want for people at home that are listening to understand, is that whatever it is that you may need, if it just, you want a quick refocusing technique or strategy, whatever it is, just reach out. It doesn't have to be one-on-one and hour-long meetings. If you wanted to do so, then awesome. But if not, just kind of send me your email, shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to, again, provide with resources or books or podcasts or just quick insights, strategies, worksheets, whatever it may be. Just feel free to reach out and I'll be really happy to help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. That's fantastic. So we've talked about mental performance consultants. We've talked about coaches. We've talked about team. We've talked about being an individual on a team. We've talked about mental preparation. I think the toolbox has a lot of room for growth. And I think you've given us some great words of advice. And I hope that everybody has taken some nuggets away for their personal toolbox development. I have FAST written down. That's good for me. I'll add to my journaling. That's fantastic. So personally, I want to say thank you. Kelly may have some wrap-up thoughts too, but thank you very much, Chloé, for taking the time to be with our guests tonight and to share all of these insights. It was indeed a pleasure, and I may need that email. So there you go.
Perfect. Kelly, now you have it.
That's right. Kelly, how about your wrap-up thoughts?
Yeah, I want to second that as well. Just thank you so much, Chloé, for coming on tonight. We're always looking for lots of information on podcasts, different things and recommendations. Definitely we'll reach out to you about that. I know that we've been actually identifying, so Casey's been in the background identifying some questions that we have that people have been throwing out there. So we will toss it over to her. So don't go anywhere. We got some Q&A for you. But again,
not going anywhere.
we've been chatting over an hour, and I think that, quite frankly, we could probably do another hour or two of this podcast.
Yes. I'm very biased, but I could talk about this for hours. So usually I need to be reminded to stop talking. That's
no. It was, as I said, it was fantastic just because you're somebody who's so passionate about it, and it's such an interesting subject. It really truly is. So why don't we get Casey on and she can go through some of those questions that she's identified.
Of course.
Well, I think we've actually answered most of the questions that were posted, but we can go over them quickly just to make sure. So Tim was asking if you had any tips on maintaining focus while you're shooting in competition.
Good. Yeah. And that's a good question. And I know we've barely touched on focus, which is why we could probably talk about all these things for hours on end. But focus is a big one, right? A very important skill, and a great skill that can be trained as well. But I would say, especially when we're talking in competition, it would probably be to have a great shot routine, a great plan. So knowing ahead of time what cues you want to focus on, because it's really easy to say that I want to remain focused, but what is it that I want to be focused on at every point during my performance, right? Because I will not be focused on the target for the whole time. There will be time where it's me focusing on my breathing. Maybe it's me focusing on my coach if there's feedback. Maybe it is that I am focusing on the weather conditions if it's an outdoors event, right? So it's also, I would say, the first thing, know what you want to be focused on, right? What are the cues? Knowing that they will change. Shot to shot, they will change. So know what your process is, what the cues are. And then usually I would say an easy trick or way to do that would be keywords, right? So if I know that at some point it's the target, at some point it's my coach, and of course I'm making it really basic here, but it would be that in my shot process, at some point I say target or I say coach type thing, right? So keywords can be really helpful. But the first thing I would say for sure for focus, know what your cues are, the ones you're looking for, what you want to focus on. I think the target's an obvious one, but we forget that we're not focused on the target the whole time. And so it's okay to want to focus on your breathing, your thoughts, sensations, right? How am I feeling? Am I injured? Am I feeling good? The weather, whatever it may be, know what those cues are. And then keywords can be really helpful for that. And also the same way, need to know what your distractions may be. So acknowledging the distractions in environments, actually acknowledging them and recognizing them will make them less distracting in themselves, but also then having a plan to come back and refocus, either whether with keywords or a breathing technique, but that usually are the go-to.
Yeah.
Well, those are
Amazing. Great advice.
Yep.
All right. And then our second one is from Connor, and he's asking, how to get several shooting friends that I've been trying to get into competition shooting. They're of the belief that they wouldn't be capable or good enough. Would you have any advice on getting them past that mental barrier?
Yeah, and that's a big one. I would say there are a few things here. I would ask them, what do they mean by not good enough? I think as soon as you register for the competition, and that means that you are good enough to be there, right? You registered, you're ready to be there. I would ask them what not good enough is, or not be capable. So kind of defining that a little bit, understanding that what that barrier is a bit more. And I would also probably recommend, I think one thing that it could be interesting in that case is what I would recommend is for athletes to, if they feel like it's too big of a jump going to their first competition, I would encourage them to leave their comfort zone in other aspects of their lives. So maybe challenge themselves in other things. Maybe it's trying a new hobby. Maybe it's other things that maybe are a bit less scary than actual competition. And then through doing that, they'll build resilience. They'll be more comfortable with trying new things, and that will ultimately probably help them want to go to the competition. I think as well as a friend, sometimes it's providing the information. Not wanting to compete or go to competition often comes from not knowing how it goes, the scores, people are good, how it works. So sometimes providing that insight and providing that information as to here's how it goes. Everybody's focused on themselves. We are way more worried about what are other things than what they thinks, and then what they actually do, or how often they think about us, right? So that everybody's focused on themselves. And also sometimes maybe getting other competition scores out there, if there are some that are out there, and being able to see that it's not only high performance athletes or people that do shoot 25s or only 10s that are competing. There are people that are just there to have fun, and they're just trying and starting out. And so maybe that's something that could be interesting. So kind of to sum it up, I would say understanding what you mean by not saying that you're not good enough. I think as soon as you're willing to compete, that means you're good enough to compete, right? You're willing to be there. Understanding that, and then getting out of your comfort zone as often as possible. So if that seems like it's too big of a leap, do it in something else that doesn't seem as big, but it's still a bit of a stretch. Get that confidence going of you trying new things. And then also get the information that you feel you're missing. And also look at actual facts, which are results from previous competitions, that people aren't only shooting 25s.
That's great advice. All right. And then from Devin, can you touch on how to calm your mind the night before a match when trying to go to sleep?
That's a big one. So I would say, again, that's where your sleep routine comes in. So that's something that needs to be built in and rehearsed and practiced way before the night before a match. I think that's the thing. Sometimes when we think of sleep, it's super early, but then we usually go to sleep super late. And so we don't have a routine that allows us to do so. So having a great routine is a big one. I think there are two things that I usually recommend for athletes, and you'll see it again. I'm going back to the same things here, but meditation is a big one. So I have a lot of athletes that practice meditation right before bed. It's a great way to come back in the present, come back in the now. There are great apps out there. One of the apps that I usually use, Headspace, is a big one. I'm not paid to say this, although I wish I was with the amount of athletes that have gone onto this app. But Headspace is a big one, and they have a huge section for just sleep. So there's like night podcasts, night music, night meditations. So there are great ones out there. So that's the first one. The second one, I would say sometimes journaling could be really helpful in that time. So right before bed, if you're finding yourself thinking about what time's breakfast tomorrow, what time do I have to get up, what is this, to just write it down. So then your brain knows it's written down somewhere. You won't forget about it. You've done everything. You write everything out. Then you do a bit of reading or meditation, and you should fall asleep quite easily at that point. So I would say, again, kind of writing things down usually helps. So even if we are to think of just even when we were all in school the night before an exam, when we're trying to think of everything before bed of just, do I remember everything? You write things down so that you know them for sure. If it is your schedule for the next day or important things that you want to remember. And then you do a mindfulness exercise such as meditation that usually kind of calms you down. You focus on breathing. It helps you transition from being really awake and super activated to actually feeling calmer and kind of enter that rest period before you actually fall asleep.
Yeah.
That works for everything, not just the night before a shooting
100%.
competition, right? So, I mean, that's great
100%.
advice for life. That's like the life hack from Chloe.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I would say too, I'm sorry. And if you are still, even if you're in an hotel room in your bed and it's been an hour, 2 hours, you're not falling asleep, get out of bed. Don't go on your phone or watch TV. Just get on, maybe on the couch. Maybe there's a chair when you're in an hotel room, whatever it may be. And then do your breathing there. Just do some reading, whatever it may be. When you start falling tired or you're starting to feel tired again, then go back to bed so that your brain associates the bed with sleep and not with restless nights.
Yeah.
That's good.
Great advice. The other thing I also recommend is having a list, a checklist.
Yes.
So you can go through it so you know you're not forgetting anything.
100%.
And then you also, I'm not a huge fan. I'm a little OCD this way. Maybe we should talk later. About making sure everything is in the places where we associate them with as well. So we know that we're not forgetting anything because that's kind of where the mind goes when we're trying to go to sleep at night. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that's a big one with even when you're packing your suitcase. That's a big one with athletes as well. So again, and let me know if I'm talking too much here. I know it's getting late for a lot of people, but that's the thing too, is make a list. But I would say share that list with someone. If you live with someone, you have a friend, go over that list with them. And so that after you're done and you've done it, you've double checked with your suitcase, everything's there the night before, everything's in at the right spot. Then after that, if you get the urge of wanting to check again, you confirm with your friend that they've seen it as well. So then that helps us not getting into that pattern of going back into our suitcases or actual our competition clothes or even our lunches or whatever it may be that we're doing, not going over and over again. Because then what that may lead to us doing is actually sometimes we take things out to look in the bag or whatever it may be, and that's when we forget stuff. So I would say writing a list, you can check it, double check it, your list, share it with someone, have someone acknowledge that the things are there, right? So you can say toothbrush and then they go and look, it's there. And then after that, that's your person that you go to double check rather than you going back and over again. So sometimes that eases the mind a little bit as well.
Awesome. Well, I think we have one more question, and it's from Tim. And he's asking, how do you mentally deal with technical issues with equipment and resetting to perform?
That's a good one. So I would say for sure, when we're talking technical issues, that's where having an amazing coach or great knowledge of your equipment comes in. That's usually not where I come in. I would say, again, understanding your equipment, I think sometimes preparing for those things to happen are really important. So if there's anything that you can do from a technical standpoint in terms of equipment, things like stuff that you can bring more of or that you can prepare for, that's super important. I would say then after that, after everything's figured out and your equipment's working and you can actually compete, it's kind of going back to what we've talked about and going back to what is it that I can do now? What is it that I control now? And knowing that you cannot go back and change it. It happened. But what is it that you can focus on now so that you have a great and fun performance? So focusing on the present, I think at that point, probably your arousal level might be really high. So probably some breathing techniques or relaxation techniques, because sometimes our heart rate kind of goes up and our breathing gets a bit shallower just from the stress of not knowing if our equipment's working. So maybe a relaxation technique, but then after that, just knowing that's part of the game. It happened. What is it that I can do now to be at my best?
Yeah. What I usually do whenever I have a malfunction is I just, take my gun out of my shoulder, take a breath, close my eyes and just kind of give myself it's time to reset, and then get back into my shoulder again. So
yeah, especially during a round itself, kind of doing that breathing and just resetting really quickly. And again, it could be a cue word. It could be just a deep breath. It could be focusing on something in the environment that brings you back in the present. So yeah, for sure. During a round, I was also thinking of just like my malfunction just between rounds or when you get to competition, which we've seen often as well, or just sometimes traveling with equipment. So that's a big one too. But it's just knowing, kind of get your heart rate back down, focus on the right cues.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Cool.
Great question.
That's it for the questions. That's great questions from our audience today. So
I think it's time for Rahina to give things away.
Yay!
I love to do that. So I will need your help, Casey, as always.
Yeah.
So let's
what are we giving away first?
Let's start with the She Shoots t-shirt. So
right.
Who will be the winner for that one?
I'm counting. Random number generator in the comments. Okay, so our first winner is Nina Baker.
Yay, congratulations.
Nina Baker, you commented via Facebook, so we'll reach out to you that way, and we will need your address so that we can send you that t-shirt and the size of the t-shirt. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, right. So the other thing we'll be giving out is the Canada First Annual Prize Pack.
All right, and it disappeared. Oh, there. Derek Butts.
Hey, Derek, congrats.
And you are on Facebook as well, so we will contact you through that.
Excellent. And yeah, we've got an assorted bunch of goodies that Canada First has provided, and so I will get those put together and put in the mail for you. So I hope everybody that's listening out there that has received your prize packages has had the chance to get them out and wear them. And if you do, take a picture and make sure that you link us, hashtag us, do whatever it is, because the She Shoots podcast would love to see our t-shirts and see the QSIF shirts and the Canada First stuff out on gun ranges and out having fun. So please share it with us.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, congratulations to our winners, and let's get on to our upcoming events. So I'll start off with the CUSF stuff. So for CUSF, we have our April Shotgun Tournament, which is starting on April 15th, and it will run until May 2nd. All scores will be submitted by 11:59 p.m. on May 2nd. In order to be entered, and the prizes will include a range of medals, stipends, and a fully funded PAL course as well. So if you're interested in any of those, make sure you participate in the event. All the rules and how to sign up is on the CUSF website, so you just go to CUSF.ca to enter. And also, if you're interested in volunteering for the CUSF, we're definitely looking for volunteers. So if you want to, you can write us a brief email and send that to us at submissions@cusf.ca. Thank you, Casey, for having it up there for us, because, yeah, sometimes I don't say things very well. Okay, and yeah, so we'll be looking for volunteers that have experience in establishing or managing students, sports shooting clubs, customer relationship management, web hosting, and graphic design and video editing. So if you have experience in that, or even if you don't, just send us a quick email and let us know what you want to volunteer with us, and we'd love to have you. So that's it for me. So Kelly, that's you now, Maple Seed.
Okay, so Project Maple Seed, our events are being posted currently on the event section of Project Maple Seed. Just go to our website, which is mapleseedrifleman.com, and check that out. We also actually have some of our slings back in stock. So if you're coming out to an event, come, drop by the store and pick up a sling. Or we might have some at our events as well, because I've sent some out to our shoot bosses. The other thing is also with the QSIF Maple Seeds, we're looking at dates in October for those. So watch for those if you are part of the QSIF community. We have events specifically for you, so watch for those. We're going to be having some Lady Seeds over the next little while as well. I'm just trying to coordinate dates for those. So lots of things happening. Look at the various regions, lots of Maple Seeds that are coming up. As we confirm the dates, we're also populating those on the event site as well. So, and then sign up for our event notification too. Go to the website. There's a section there where you can put your email in. And when events are released to the public, you'll get a notification. Yeah, that's me. What about you, Deneen and Casey?
Man, oh man. Well, Casey and I have been talking about stuff, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, coming up in the summer in the Kamloops area where she is located. I can't thank our audience and social media folks enough. I've been getting so many inquiries about ladies events. And the other thing I want to do is a shout out all the previous guests that we've had that have events. Jamie Lee's got something going on at Fort Mac. I know Laura and Devin are busy with IPSC and putting together big shoots. I see that the 32 special has been posted for IPSC Black Badge courses. In Calgary, we have the second, the Shooting Edge Ladies' second night is tomorrow night, and it goes on and on. So I'm trying my best to get out and support and be there and be a range officer and do a few of those other things as well. And I'm sitting in a hotel room right now down in Windy Lethbridge because I'm with a group of wonderful instructors from Silver Willow Sporting Clays Club up in Carstairs. And we're going to do a little goose hunt tomorrow. So,
Nice.
So I'm going to remember Chloe's advice and your advice, Kelly. I'm going to write everything down, my checklist. I'll check my hunting gear bag over and over. So hopefully, because it's a 4 a.m. call, it's going to be an early day. So everybody that reaches out to us through the website and through socials, all the events and cross promotions, we try and get everything out as much as we can, and certainly happy to share. So share with us. We'll share with the rest of the She Shoots community.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's it for all of us, which is good because we've gone on for a long time, which is not bad because there's a lot of good information. So thanks so much again, Chloe, for joining us today. So I'll just go ahead and wrap it up for today. So let's once again thank our sponsors, Cabela's Canada Outdoor Fund, Savage Arms, Beretta, Vortex, and Canada First Abo. If you like today's episode, please leave us a like and follow so you don't miss out on any of our episodes. You can watch us on YouTube and Facebook, or you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. If you liked our message and would like to learn more about our programs, check out our websites at cusf.ca, ladyguns.ca, and mapleseedrifleman.com. To support us and get some additional perks, check out our membership programs. Thank you all for tuning into the She Shoots podcast, episode 16, The Mental Game. Make sure to join us on May 9th for episode 17. Episode theme, topic, and guests will be announced on our social medias, so make sure to follow us for all the She Shoots updates. Thank you, and good night.
Bye, thanks.